So what I'm going to focus on today, I'm going to be sharing my screen a lot. I have a lot of things open from Safdieh that I already did. And we're going to go through some of the Navi. And the name of the class is the rebuilding of the Mikdash. So how do we rebuild it? The way I'm going to start this class is by the end. I'm going to show you what happened in the end and work backwards. And then from that, we'll hopefully come out with a very nice lesson. So I only have 25 minutes. Try to hold all questions to the end. If we have time, great. If not, then we can either put it on our chat or whatever it is. We'll figure out a way to communicate. So you look at Yirmiyahu Nun Bet, which is the last perek in Yirmiyahu, and it's talking about a king named Tzidkiyahu, who was the king of Israel. There was Malchut Yehuda and Malchut Israel, and the kingdom was split from even before the time of David HaMelech up until the end of all the kings. And we had here, it says in his 21st year, Vayas hara b'nei Hashem. Hara generally means avodah zarah. In those times, avodah zarah was all the rage, and he did the evil in God's eyes, just like Yehoiakim, who was the king of Yehuda, also did. So Yehoiakim and Tzidkiyahu were both kings at the same time. One was Yehuda, one was Israel, and obviously they did evil in the eyes of God. And basically what we see here is that we had the Matzor, right? The Matzor, if you remember, was on a certain day called Asara B'Tevet. And there are times when Asara B'Tevet even falls out on a Friday, that yes, the Hachamim say you would have to fast on a Friday, because it is the beginning of the end. This was back years ago in around, I would say, 589 BCE. This is the first Beit HaMikdash. It was actually destroyed in 586 BCE. Hachamim even tell us that if Asara B'Tevet were ever to fall out on Shabbat, we would also have to fast it, but mathematically that will never happen. However, this year it will fall out on a Friday. Then you see here, B'Chodesh HaRevi'i, Tish'a Chodesh, the fourth month, we know it to be the Chodesh of Tammuz. So on the 9th, right, the 9th of Tammuz, the Ra'av was getting worse and worse in Yerushalayim. And then, of course, they broke through the walls, the breach, which was on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, which was exactly 3 weeks ago today, where they breached through the walls. And it says, Hail Kasdim. Kasdim worked for the Babylonian army, which in English we call them mercenaries. They were hired soldiers by the Babylon to actually go in and to destroy Yerushalayim. So we see here basically that they went in, they grabbed the Melech, which was Tzidkiyahu. All right, they brought Tzidkiyahu to Melech Bavel, who's known as the Nebuchadnezzar, and of course they brutally murdered his children in front of his eyes, and then they actually singed or actually blinded Tzidkiyahu HaMelech. Okay, U'B'Chodesh HaChamishi, the 5th month, which is known as the month of the Ari, meaning the lion month, the Mazal, the lion, which is known as Av. What do we see here? The 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar. So his royal officer, his second in command, Nebuzaradan Rav Tabahim, who was known as the killer. Rav Tabahim literally means the master of Tabahim, of the chefs. Either he was known as a chef because he was in charge of something in the city of Bavel, or most likely he was in charge of destroying and killing people, as if just butchering them. So he was ordered by Nebuchadnezzar to go into Yerushalayim, and they burned the house of God, which is, of course, sadly, Beit HaMikdash, and all the houses in Yerushalayim. And Yerushalayim basically just went up in flames. So the rest of the perek, you're seeing how they're all being exiled and destroyed, and Bnei Israel being taken to, or the remainder, I should say, of Yehuda was taken to Galut. Now, when I say Yisrael, Malchut Israel, they were already taken away in the year 722 BCE. So about 150 years later, 586 BCE, was when the Yehuda, the remnants of Yehuda and Binyamin, and whatever we had left, Leviim, were taken to Bavel. Okay, so you see everything, all of the Kelim Beit HaMikdash were taken to Bavel. Everything was there. Everything was there. And then we see some hope that Tzidkiyahu HaMelech was given some respect in the house of Nebuchadnezzar, right, later on. Either way, we see that it's a terrible, terrible crime, what happened to Bnei Israel. But the question is, was it warranted or not? That's what we have to see. So I'm going to share my screen one more time. I'm going to minimize this. By the way, this last perek of Yirmiyahu is also very much synonymous with the last perek of Melachim Bet, perek Kafeh. It's basically the same thing over and over again. So I'm going to go a little backwards now and see why is it that it happens. So if we look at Sefer Yeshayahu, you will notice this is actually what we read every year. Parashat Devarim last week, Shabbat Hazon. It's called Shabbat Hazon because it's always Parashat Devarim and it's always the week before Tish'a BeAb. We call it Hazon because we read Hazon Yeshayahu ben Amos. So this is what Yeshayahu foresaw when he was living, and he was living during the times of these four kings, Uzziyahu, Yotam, Ahaz, and Hizkiyahu. And he basically says, he's talking to Bnei Israel. I'm going to skip around a lot of Pesukim. Pasuk Bet is a famous one. So God, as if to say, is our Father. We say Avinu Malkeinu. So he says, I raised up my own sons, and they have sinned against me. More of like they rebellious against me. He says, even in Pasuk Gimel, even a shore, an animal, knows its master. But for some reason, Yisrael, which is my nation, Yisrael lo yada, ami lo hitbonan. They don't care to look and see the ways of God and see the ways of the Torah. Rather, they rather just be negligent and do as they wish all the time. So you see these very tough language, a lot of harsh words being spoken at Bnei Israel, being admonished from Yeshayahu to the nation. This is a nation that's full of avonot. They self-destruct, they left God. They use the word nazoru ahor. Nazoru is an interesting word because it comes from the word nazir. Now a nazir basically makes a vow to himself that he wishes not to have any pleasures of the world. But his glory is his hair. That's why the word nazir, right, which also comes to mean, I want to also say the word nezer, which means crown, right? The glory or the crown of a nazir is growing out his hair. So nazoru ahor, the same way a nazir strays away from society, and you could see it on him that his hair is overflowing, so too Bnei Israel have chosen to act like nazirim, and the glory upon them actually is the doom and gloom, where you could see their clothes are ripped, their hair is long because they're in mourning, right? And they basically look disgusting. But they basically chose that path for themselves. So Hashem is basically saying, or Yeshayahu is saying in the words of God, he's saying that Bnei Israel had chosen their own path, and they've chosen to go astray. And basically, not me, it's because of their avonot. And they were warned many, many times throughout all of the Nevi'im not to stray from the path of God and to keep true to his Torah and his mitzvot. So if you look carefully, it says that Bnei Israel is basically compared to a sick body, that there's no healing. Whatever ointment you put on them, it doesn't matter. They have basically reduced themselves to Sodom and Amorah, which we've seen the first time in Parashat Vayera, that would be Perek Yotet in Bereshit, and then again in Parashat Nitzavim, which is always the parasha that we read before Rosh Hashanah, where Moshe Rabbeinu was gathering everyone one last time to say, we don't want to turn into the Sodom and Amorah, God forbid. So make sure to stay true to the Torah. And of course, years later, in Yeshayahu's time, Yeshayahu is still warning them, just like Moshe Rabbeinu did all those years ago. And Bnei Israel have basically forced these horrible ways upon themselves because of Avodah Zarah and just leaving and putting God astray. So it's as if to say God is telling Bnei Israel, I don't even want your korbanot. Now, why does he say korbanot? Because in those times, Bnei Israel were known to come to Beit HaMikdash, give a korban, and then when they go back home in their backyard, they're giving Avodah Zarah. So you're being hypocritical. What are you doing? And that's why God says, I've had enough of your korbanot. I don't want them anymore. I'm not interested. This is probably the most harshest. Who asked you to come into my Beit HaMikdash, into my courtyard, and just trample straight in? Who asked? I didn't ask you to do this, just to come trample into my courtyard and just basically give the korbanot when your hands are full of blood. He even says, I'm disgusted with all your mu'adim. God is actually saying, I can't stand when it's the holidays. I don't like when it's Pesach and Sukkot and Shavuot, when you come to my Beit HaMikdash and your hands are full of blood and you're giving korbanot, and obviously you're not being true to yourselves or to me. When you open up your hands for prayer, or when the Kohanim do Kohanim, I can see the blood on your hands. So just stop doing it. Hidlu hareya. Stop doing this evil. And what the real problem is, and finally Yeshayahu gets to it towards the end of the Perek, is he says, Limdu hetev dirshu mishpat asheru hamotz. What I want you guys to do is bein adam lahavero. All this bein adam lamakom, I can handle it. I can forgive you, even though it's bad. We have Yom Kippur. Right? We shouldn't rely on Yom Kippur, but we have Yom Kippur that I can actually be a little easygoing on your sins. No problem, I forgive you. But I'm not going to forgive you until you forgive each other. And I'm going to take it a step further towards the end of the class. If you don't forgive each other, if you're not going to judge the almanah or the yatom fairly, which obviously you could see that they're not doing it. Because if Yeshayahu is saying, Dirshu mishpat, asheru hamot, shiftu yatom v'rivu almanah, fight for the yatom and almanah, fight for the oppressed. Obviously, if Yeshayahu is saying that, obviously that means that they're not doing that. They were letting yatomim and almanot basically suffer in the streets, not give them money, not giving them a helping hand. And if I'm not mistaken, it says about 36 times in the Torah to be true to a ger, yatom, and almanah. Now, why ger, yatom, and almanah? What's the commonality? The actual common denominator is that all three, a ger, yatom, and almanah, have nothing but God to rely on. If you think about it, an almanah is a widow. She lost her husband, and her kids are probably older, and she's alone. A ger, he has to ostracize himself from his entire Goy family that he grew up with, which means once he makes the turn to Judaism, he cannot observe, Christian holidays or Easter or any of those holidays. He can't even go back to the house and celebrate with them. He's lighting Hanukkah while they're doing Christmas, and he can't. So basically, he's alone. Him and his wife. He has no one to turn to but to God. And the same thing with Yatom. They have no parents, or at least they're missing one of the parents. So who are they going to turn to but to God? So if God sees that we're not acting kindly, we're dealing with them the proper way, God says, don't worry, get Yatom and Almanah. I'm going to take care of you. You can lean on me. And when they cry, right, their cry goes straight up to Kiseh HaKavod. So if God sees that you're not, Kivyachol, he sees that you're not really helping them out, he's going to, leash his punishments upon Bnei Israel. So for Yeshayahu to say, you are not judging a ger, yatom, and almanah correctly, then you're in for a lot of trouble. And that's why if you look later, if you resist, and you're going to go against me, and you're going to rebel, and guess what's going to happen? The sword, your skin will be eaten by the sword. And then, of course, we get to the famous words, which we read today, Megillat Echa, and last night, Echa hetel azonah. The word Echa is really Ech, but it's a more exclamatory word, where Echa, how is this possible? Kiryane emana, that this city became like a zona, where there's prostitution, and there's basically, it's not prostitution, it's more of chaos happening. Kiryane emana, this loyal city, which was full of mishpat and tzedek. And now what's relying, or I would say lying beneath the city, is Yalin ba ve'atam ratzachim. Now what tzedek used to actually be the theme of the city is now laden with murderers, meratzachim. And it keeps going on and on. Yatom lo yishpotu. This is the worst. It says, Kulo ohev shohad ve'rodef shalmonim. Shalmonim comes to the word shalom. What that basically means is that the judges are so corrupt that one day one judge would absolve someone of the sin, and he basically tell the defendant, I'll absolve you tomorrow in your case if you absolve me tomorrow in my case. So the judges are so corrupt where they're actually making shalom between them. They're giving each other shohad and bribing each other by making peace between them, that I'll take your back and you take care of my back. Why? Also that they don't have to judge fairly the yatom and the almanah. God sees this and he says, I'm going to take vengeance. And therefore the way to actually have tzedek, and these are famous words that we say every day. Pasuk Kav Zayin, yes, if you guessed it, it's from the Amidah, which we say 3 times a day. Only once you judge fairly, right, each other. We have the original Shoftim, the original Dayanim, the original Sanhedrin, that are going to judge fairly, only then will we have tzedek. Right? Kav Zayin, the last pasuk in the one of the last pasukim in the Perek, this is to me the key line. Tzion b'mishpat tipadeh v'sheveh b'tzedakah. Right? Is that Tzion, which is Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim, will only be judged fairly and will only be redeemed when there's actual tzedek u'mishpat. If there's no tzedek u'mishpat, if God sees Kivyachol that you can handle it down here, then up there he's going to say, I'm going to take vengeance and I'm not going to forgive you. If you can't forgive each other, then I can't forgive you either. Which is basically like a Mishnah that we see every year on Yom Kippur. I'm going to open it up right now. Instead of having Echa, I'm going to close Echa for now. I want you to see this. It's important that you see this. We're going to go to the Mishnah. It's the last Mishnah in Masechet Yoma. We say it. We see it every year. Actually, we have to ask forgiveness every year to each other, and it makes a ton of sense. And it's very apropos for the holiday of, or I should say, the Moed of Tish'a. it says, if you're going to say that I'm going to sin and I'll make teshuvah, I'll sin, I'll make teshuvah, right? They're not going to actually, your teshuvah won't be really complete. If you say, if you say I'm going to sin, and I know that Kippur is going to come up one day and I'll be able to be forgiven. Guess what? And here's the key line. The avarot that you have between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on Kippur, God can forgive you. However, right? If you think that you have some type of struggle with your friend and it'll be absolved and God will take care of it, the answer is no. If you yourself don't go and you're not meratzeh et havero, you're not going to go to your friend and appease him with kind words and say, I was wrong, it was me, I'm sorry, and you don't forgive each other, then God's not going to forgive you either. And where do we learn this from? So how does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah learn this from the pasuk? He says, right? You want to say averot between you and God? Yes, lifnei Hashem titharu, but lifnei Hashem, not lifnei your haver, your fellow Jew. And that's what he says. Kippur is not going to help you. So you could see here, obviously, that what Yeshayahu was saying is not so far-fetched. He's basically quoting the Mishnah. He's quoting, obviously, the words of God that he saw in a halom and in a nebu'ah. And he's telling Bnei Israel, you can give korbanot, you can say sorry to God, but if you're not going to say sorry to your friend, nothing is going to happen. And that brings us to, how did this start? Where did this all come from, this night of Tish'a BeAb? It happened a long, long time ago. Bnei Israel b'midbar. And it's a famous midrash. When the miraglim, and I shouldn't even say miraglim, I should say, because the actual word in the parashat Shalach Lecha, says tarim. If you look carefully, it says, Moshe Rabbeinu hires men, and he says, I want you to actually go and tour, literally, T-O-U-R, tour the land. And it says, Vayashuva mitura, say, tour the land, hatarim. If you look on here, Vaya'alu vayaturu utaretz, again, doesn't use the word meragelim. And the funny thing is that, so why do we call them the meraglim? I'll show you very quickly before I wrap up this point. Is that later on in Sefer Devarim, Parashat Devarim, we read it again last week. What does it say Parashat Devarim? This is when Moshe Rabbeinu is giving his final speech to Bnei Israel, and they're about to walk into Eretz Canaan and fight the nations of the Canaani. And he says, this is what happened years ago. Echa esalavadi. Again, it says the word echa, which we read last Shabbat, because it's reminding us about Parashat Echa, right? And we see here, it says, I sent soldiers, I sent men, and it says, Vayragelu ota. Vayragelu ota, right there in Pasuk Daled, and they actually spoke bad about the land. So obviously this is going back, the reason why we call it Hetem Meraglim is because of what Moshe Rabbeinu says in Parashat Devarim. Going back to Parashat Shelach Lecha, so we sent the spies, or the people to scout the land, and what ended up happening was they brought a false report back. And we all know the false report back. The key word here was Ephes. Ephes ki azaham. We are nothing compared to these giants that we're going to see in Eretz Canaan. We can't handle it. The only two people that actually believed were Kalev and Yehoshua. And they were the only two people from Dor Midbar that actually are going to go into Eretz Israel. And it's true, they went into Eretz Israel. So once they heard these horrible reports, and I'm not going to go into detail, basically it was it's what you call mob theory. Mob theory is when you have all of the 10 men saying, we can't do it, it's not going to happen, we can't defeat them. And Kalev and Yeshua saying, no, we can do it. Tovah haaretz me'od me'od. And they said, no, you're crazy, it's not happening. These people are giants. They looked at us like grasshoppers, they could smash us, which is already not true. So they went from Lashon Hara to then what we call Motzi'ei Dibba. Motzi'ei Dibba is just speaking false things about the land. And once that happened, Vayotzi'u Dibba ta'aretz, Dibba means false things. And they said that when you walk into the land, it's going to swallow you up, which is not true. Eretz ochelet yosheveahi, that's not true. And we saw the Nephilim, and we were like grasshoppers. All of a sudden, Bnei Israel started to cry. And from here, from this pasuk, this is where, if I get Rashi on this, if he says it, it'll be great to see. No, it doesn't happen over here. Bottom line is that Bnei Israel started to cry, and since we cried a bechiya of hinam, this is what the Gemara says in several places, kivyachol, as if to say, Hashem said, you're going to cry a cry that is nonsensical and for nothing, then I'm going to make sure to make you cry in the future on this night for a specific reason. And this was the night that the Hachamim say was the night of Tish'a, and that's how it all started. It started from a night of crying for no reason. So the question we really have to ask ourselves, right, I'm going to stop the screen sharing for now, is why were they crying and what was going on? So I actually heard from, it's a famous Gemara on Masechet Gittin, but also Rabbi Friend wrote something beautiful. And he said that we all know the story of Kamsa bar Kamsa, which happened in the Gemara, that in the times before Mikdash, when the Roman government had an upper hand on Bnei Israel. So there was a story about two men named Kamsa bar Kamsa. So there was a man who was hosting a party. He told his, his right-hand man to go and invite Kamsa. And in the end, he made a mistake, he got confused, and he invited bar Kamsa. So he's making this huge festive party, and all of a sudden the host of the party is seeing bar Kamsa, and he's saying, I can't handle this. He walks over to bar Kamsa and says, buddy, get out, go take a hike. Bar Kamsa, realizing that huge embarrassment is going to befall him, he says, I'll tell you what, I'll pay for my meal, you don't have to look at me, and just, and I'll leave right after. He says, the host tells Bar Kamsa, no, you have to get out right now. So Bar Kamsa says, all right, he'll up his ante. I'll pay for half of this entire meal, half the entire meal of everyone. It's going to cost you a fortune. I'll pay for half. Just please don't throw me out. Still, the host is relentless and says, no, you're going to get up right now and get out. Bar Kamsa says, I'll pay for the entire meal that you're serving now to all hundreds and hundreds of guests. Just please don't spare me the humiliation. Still, the host was adamant and stubborn and says, you're going to get out right now. And he had his men actually escort this man physically out of the party, which is when Bar Kamsa was so distraught about the humiliation that he suffered. He went to the Roman government and ratted on the Jews. And that's when the Gemara says, because of the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, this is why the destruction of the second temple happened. So you could see all this back and forth. And really, it was a night that Bnei Israel were crying about a fake report brought by the Meraglim. And then eventually, this Ben Adam L'Havero with Kamsa Bar Kamsa. And then again, Yeshayahu was telling us, again, it's because we weren't good to each other. So what does it come down to? It doesn't really come down to God, it comes down to us. It's how we deal with each other. And I'm going to even add a little point that I heard from Rabbi Friend a couple of days ago. And that is, if you look at the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, and we don't have that much time left, right? You see really that what would happen if the host would have told himself, I see Bar Kamsa, it's really knowing the you-know-what out of me right now, and I can't take the fact that he's sitting in my party, and my shaliach made a mistake to invite Bar Kamsa instead of Kamsa. Imagine if he would have just, for one moment, would have swallowed his pride and said, I don't like it, right? I'm going to take my anger pills. I will manage my anger right now. I will have a coffee. I will have a drink right now, and I will calm down, and I'll let it be. Imagine if he would have done that. This whole humiliation would not have happened. And Bar Kamsa would have not gone to the Roman government and ratted us out. And I know looking back in speculation is not the smartest move to do. But my point for saying is forget about the Ben Adam Makom, and even I would tell you the Ben Adam L'Havero to a certain degree. The key here really is not us and each other. It's us within ourselves. If you learn to control yourself and you learn to say, I'm not going to get angry, and I'm not going to go and humiliate my friend, and I'm going to control my anger, and I'm going to be careful. 3 times, I think 3 times before I actually say something bad, then maybe, just maybe, we can all calm down, we can all be at ease, and we'll understand that everyone is a person, even though you may not be happy with this person and that person. He humiliated you 2 years ago and you want to get him back. And vengeance is something that it's hard to put away. But the Gemara tells us, so the Torah tells us, lo tikum. It says lo titor, don't hold a grudge. And it's easier said than done, and I'm speaking to myself as well. But at the same time, if we know for ourselves that we're going to calm ourselves down and we're going to be much better people, then yes, slowly but surely we will have the rebuilding of the third Beit HaMikdash. Amen. Amen. Thank you all for attending the class. And תזכו לראות בנחמת ציון בקרוב.
Thank you.